Okay. Good evening, viewers of Dayton Access Television, and thank you for joining us this evening for the February 2025 edition of the Ombudsman program. I'm very, very pleased tonight to have with me as my guest Amy Radachi, who is the CEO and president of Rebuilding Together Dayton, and has been so for a number of years. And she can tell us all about that as they're beginning to gear up to celebrate their anniversary. So, as we prepare for that, Amy, why don't you take a few minutes and tell us how this wonderful agency that you're running got started for us?
Well, thanks for having me here, Diane. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you.
Um, Rebuilding Together Dayton started about almost 30 years ago as a different organization called Christmas in April. So at the time, we were a 1 day a year program, and we worked on the last Saturday in April. Um, the city of Dayton, I still live in a historic district. I was living in Dayton View Historic, and I was serving on the city of Dayton's Landmark Commission. And they needed to send someone to the National Trust for Historic Preservation conference in Texas. And I was the newest person on the commission, and nobody else chose to go. So I was last man in. So I went to the conference, and if you can imagine, there's thousands of people there from across the country. I didn't know a single soul in the entire place. I walked into a meeting room, and it was in a big hotel, and there were no seats left. And I took a spot on the floor up against the wall in the back of the room by the door. And I just sat next to this person, and I happened to look over at her name tag, and it said Christmas in April. And I said, "What's Christmas in April?" And she said, "Come to my session tomorrow and find out." She whipped out the agenda for the week's meetings, and she had a presentation the next day. So I went to her session, and it turned out that it was Patty Johnson, who was the president of Christmas in April, based in Washington, D.C. And she had with her three how to start an affiliate in your community handbooks. And I went to the head of the class as soon as she was done, and I said, I have to have one of these. We have to start this in Dayton. I'm very familiar with my neighborhood. A lot of senior citizens need work on their homes and can't afford to do so. So we've got to get this started in Dayton. And she said they had tried to get one started in Dayton a few years prior, but weren't successful. They had come from out of town, and they were meeting with some corporate folks, and they didn't really have any support at the community level. So it didn't really take off. So I came back home to Dayton, and I was sitting on the board of Preservation Dayton, and we needed a speaker for our January speaker event in 1996. This was October of 95. So I said, I have the speaker for us. This lady is really engaged and articulate and enthusiastic about this program. We have to have her come speak. So someone donated some air miles, and someone donated a couple nights at the Steamboat House bed and breakfast in St. Anne's. And we brought Patty Johnson to Dayton in February of 1996. And it was so funny because we didn't know anything about how to start an affiliate. And there was somebody in the audience that night with a Christmas in April sweatshirt on. And I was like, I don't even have one of those yet. How is this? Who is this person? And where did she come from? So the founder of Christmas in April was from Midland, Texas, Bobby Trimble. This happened to be his daughter, who was living in Dayton and working in Dayton. She knew Patty, so she heard about Patty coming to speak, so she wanted to come and see Patty again. So Sherry Trimble ended up being one of our first board members. So Christmas in April started in 1974 in Midland, Texas, with Sherry's father. And there was a group of folks at a church who had a Sunday school class where they wanted to go out and do God's work out in the community. So they were helping fellow parishioners with work on their homes. And one of the homeowners said, well, this is just like having Christmas in April. So Trevor Armbrister was a senior editor with Reader's Digest in Washington, D.C. He came to Midland, got the story, took it back to Washington. He took it national in 1988, and you can say the rest is history. We have had as many as 200 affiliates across the country. We are at 108 now. Some of the affiliates stayed with the Christmas in April brand when we rebranded in 2001, and they are known as Christmas in Action. So there's a handful of those affiliates across the country. But we changed our name and went countywide and year round in 2001 to reflect the name change, which is better representative of the work that we do. Christmas in April seemed a little bit like we sold Christmas ornaments year round. It really didn't explain the impact. There were 16 different brands across the country, no matter, depending on where you lived. Christmas in October, Christmas in May. So there was no real consistency branding wise. So we took it year round and changed the name with our national office in 2001 to Rebuilding Together.
Well, that's a wonderful story, and it's a story that really expresses the importance of having local people involved in such an activity, because it didn't fly at first because it had people coming in from other areas, and so it really didn't click in Dayton until you had some Dayton folks involved. And it also is a story that's not really all that different than a lot of grassroots movements, is it, Amy?
Right. It was really great because I found a house in my neighborhood in Dayton View, and Linda found a house in her neighborhood in St. Anne's. Bob found a house in McPherson Town. So the first year, we threw it together. We became a 501c3 by March. We had our first rebuilding day that April, and we did 8 houses in one day. And so we had about 250 volunteers. Our first group was the Chaminade Julian Catholic High School Honor Society. And Pizza Factory donated lunches. We couldn't even afford t-shirts for people, so we just kind of winged it our first year and did houses in our own neighborhoods where we were familiar. So the next year we did 12 houses, and the next year we did 17 houses. And at that point, we had no staff. We were all volunteer. We were doing it on the side. It became apparent. We had a board of directors because we were an incorporation and a legit 501c3, but it became evident that the need was getting greater, and we really needed someone to focus their attention on this as a actual position. So David Bohart is credited with that concept. He was on our board of directors as the head of the Home Builders Association. So he said, I really think we need to hire an executive director. So I applied along with about 15 or 20 other folks and was hired as the first paid staff person in July of 1998. So we're coming up on our 30th National Rebuilding Day on the last Saturday in April this year, on April 26th. So we've come a long way in 30 years.
Yes, it certainly has. And is it possible for you to at all estimate how many volunteers have been involved over these years? And I realize in asking that, I know being able to answer things like that is really difficult, but
Well,
give us a stab at it.
it's a good question because, back in the day, we hardly had computers to track information. And I remember typing our spreadsheet on a Word document, and we had no database.
Right.
So I know the first year we had 250 folks. But we never have solicited for volunteers since we started. It's word of mouth, it's neighbors helping neighbors, it's working with your community. So every year we increased our numbers to the peak of probably 1,200 volunteers on that one day. When we went year round in 2001, I mean, we had taken it to 46 houses at the max in one day, and that was crazy when you think back, because it was all over the city of Dayton. There was no
Sounds
targeting.
Exhausting.
There was, yeah, and we were spread out all over the place. We were running ladders and supplies all over town. So, that's the year we took it year round and dialed back a little bit on the actual last Saturday in April event to focus on folks who we would get calls in November from people with no heat or no running water. And before we went year round, it would be 6 months before they could receive any kind of assistance. So it became more clear every day that there was a need that needed to be met that was not going to just be managed in one day. So thousands of volunteers have supported this program, and it really wouldn't be anywhere without the volunteers that we have.
Right. I can certainly understand that. And the all the volunteers, leave a piece of themselves in this, in the projects that they are in as well. I mean, I can imagine as people drive down the street, they may say, "Oh yeah, I hammered a roof up there," or "I did this," or "I did that." And
Well, even my kids do that. They'll remember working because all my children went to Chaminade, and so they'll drive by a house and like, oh, that's the house we worked on with our senior service project, or we got service hours working over there. So and it's funny because they never knew me doing any other job but this. And before, when they were little, or before I did this, I was a paralegal for 10 years, and it was something that I continued to do when I started this, but I was able to leave that in 1998 to do this and raise my children concurrently. So it's fun to see how they have grown with this. They don't know any other way of what I've done for a living.
Sure, sure. Well, that's a very edifying story, and even if none of your children found their way into the building trades as their profession, at least they've had a hand in experiencing what this does for people and how it can change a neighborhood. So
Exactly.
that's very, very wonderful. And you mentioned it, and I just kind of wanted to ask if it's possible to talk about the importance a little bit of the donation of labor. I know that the value of a volunteer's hour gets calculated every year by an agency that promotes volunteerism. So now we can kind of quantify what we're doing here with the use of our volunteers. But would you like to comment a little bit on the donation of labor and even materials?
Well, in kind labor and materials really is the backbone of our organization. We track that information for our accountant. All volunteer hours are logged into our database now. We're very precise about logging that information. Lots of skilled contractors will donate in kind materials and labor on their invoice. They'll give us a discount, and we track that. So in 2024, we're still finalizing the numbers with our audit, but we are looking at over $200,000 in kind labor and materials from last year. So with donated and discounted rent and discounted labor and materials, we had a warehouse was purchased for us, so we were able to store all of our materials in a safe place. That the in kind cannot be understated. It's just really impactful.
Right, right. And I would think too that it gives a good outlet for the businesses who may have some things that they can't really sell to anybody else, but it can be used in a donated capacity. It will fit the construction standards. You
Right,
know,
like a scratch and dent water heater. I mean, they might not be able to sell that, but we don't care what the water heater looks like when you haven't had hot water for 12 years. I don't think you care that it has a scratch on it. So we've come to be
absolutely.
able to put those things to work.
Just thankful to definitely have that. Um, Wonderful. I'd like to talk a little bit more about our neighborhood work. Is that about this and the neighborhood work? What has been the response of some of the neighbors that have seen you all working there? Was there a beeline to get to you and get on your list and like, hey, what's going on over here? Can I get in on this?
Well, it does tend to work a couple different ways. That happens a lot of times. Somebody sees their neighbor's house getting fixed up and they want to make sure they get on that list. But it also works the other way where they think, wow, my neighbor's house is really looking nice. I need to do something with my house. And I have the ability to do that. So I need to get my act together and, straighten up and plant some flowers and cut the grass. And so that has a ripple effect as well. So we had one of my stories that I was reminded of as I was going through the scrapbook today was this wonderful lady was driving by. I happened to drive by a project site on rebuilding day, and she stopped and asked if could she help, and they said absolutely. So she ran home, she changed her clothes, she came back, and it happened to be Shiloh Church was working on this project. And so she cut some limbs and she planted flowers and laid mulch. And she's like, wow, this is a really wonderful feeling. I want to do this again. So they said, well, make sure we call on you next year to help with our group. So in the intervening 10 months, she had a serious stroke, and she ended up, somebody nominated her for our program. And Shiloh Church has been a huge supporter of ours for over 25 years. They also help assess projects before they're selected for rebuilding day. Well, I don't think it's happenstance that she was on their list of houses to go look at for rebuilding day. And when they got there, they're like, we know you and you know us, so we will do your house. So they ended up selecting her house for rebuilding day. And she had been separated from her husband from many years. She was living alone. She was recovering from the stroke. She was using tissues to stuff the hole in her door to keep the cold from coming in. And Shiloh Church volunteers came in and just really gave it a nice facelift and made her feel a lot more secure. And the following year, she was able to help them on their project again. So that I love that full circle twice kind of story about this lady.
Yes. And in many ways, it sort of fits with a caller that just called in to the station, and they have communicated the question to us through the chat. So callers, we will get you if you call in. It just may take us a few minutes, but feel free to keep your calls coming. This particular caller asked Amy to if she could think for a minute out loud with us on the relationship between faith and social action with this entire program and assisting people for their homes.
Well, I love that question. It affects it. It really impacts me because how I was raised, and I didn't know any different. I'm the youngest of four. My mother helped a lot of older people when I was growing up, and I had to go along because I didn't have any choice. I was the youngest, so I got dragged to a lot of different old ladies' houses and helped do their yard work. And I grew up with a heart for seniors. And we did a lot of mission work with our church growing up in our youth group. So we're really active. And, faith without works is dead. And so unless you put your faith into action, I think this speaks to that, because like hiding under, like this little light of mine, the song from when you're
Yes.
a child, you don't want to hide it under a bushel. So you want to go out and put your faith in action and see what you can do to help those who need it.
Right. And do you still, I would imagine, yes, but do you still find that certain churches may adopt a project or may come back year after year, even to the point of suggesting a place in their neighborhood that they know needs some attention?
We do work closely with a handful of churches. Shiloh Church, as I mentioned, is a huge supporter. They take on really some of the hardest projects because they have a lot of folks who have some great skills.
Good for
So we
them.
know there's somebody that needs a bathroom modification, like a shower, a step-in shower put in place of a tub. Shiloh Church is our go-to. First Baptist Church is my church, so they've been involved since the beginning as well. They tend to take on a house. Our church members are getting older, and I think that nationally our church membership is declining, and the average age is increasing. So we are losing some folks that we used to have due to just attrition and aging out. But churches can really put their faith into action when they work with us on some of these projects.
Wonderful. And it kind of leads me to ask next, Obviously you have a lot of donations from businesses, but was there a time in your past or with certain projects where there was any sense of competition from the trades that, hey, you're doing this for free, and this is our livelihood? Did you have to beat that back?
Actually, no. We worked with the plumbers and pipe fitters union and some of the trades folks to help on rebuilding day, so they felt like they could give back that day. But when we took it year round, we were able to do that with funding to hire skilled trades folks. So only a really small percent of our work now is done by volunteers. I would say a good 85 to 90% of our work is done by hired skilled trades folks. So we hire local contractors. We're keeping a lot of money within the community to hire them out to do the skilled work. So on all the electrical and roofing and plumbing, we do a lot of furnace replacements now. I mean, that's not something that Mr. Smith down the street who does some handyman work can do. So we hire, Butler Heating and Air is a huge supporter, Apostolic, Praise Construction. So there's a lot of local contractors that we're able to hire because of the funding that we have.
That's that's I know your list is too many to mention because of fear of leaving somebody out, but are there a couple in particular that you think really should be called out?
Well, Castle Roofing, Milt at Castle Roofing is just a godsend. He has a great personality. No job is too hard for him. He works great with our homeowners. The average age of our homeowner is 77. Their average time in their house is over 30 years, and their average income is around $20,000. So
Right.
they don't have the means to do these repairs on their own. 90% of those 65 and older want to age in place in their homes. So they need to stay there. We need to stabilize the neighborhoods by keeping their house habitable so they can age in place in a safe and healthy environment. So we really have to start with the roof and work our way down. We had a gentleman this past year, just a couple weeks ago, who his sister was helping take care of him. He was living on his own. He's nonverbal, but he's been in his own house for many years. He had been living without hot water or working furnace for 12 years.
Isn't
12
that
years.
horrific?
So she
Yeah.
was helping take care of him. She would take his laundry to the laundromat. It really was becoming unsustainable for her, as she's also a senior citizen. And we had a lot of different layers of resources to get his house in shape, but we were able to get um, gift cards donated by Lowe's from our national office to buy his appliances because he didn't have a washer and dryer, he didn't have a refrigerator. We had the water line had to be restored, the gas line had to be restored. Centerpoint Energy, Walt Hibner, as you know, is a good friend of ours. Centerpoint was great to work with to get his gas service restored. So there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of pieces to the puzzle, but we want to keep seniors in their homes in a safe and healthy environment. And that's not going to work 100% of the time, but when it can work, we want to make it work and do what we can to keep them there.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And it wouldn't be surprising that in a place as you've just described, some people would just throw up their arms and turn around and leave because it's almost like there's not one functioning system, in a home like that. So for many, it would just be completely overwhelming. And clearly for this poor man, it had become that. And, it's like any place you start, you could start here first, you could start there first, you could, always figure that would be tough to figure out all the time.
Well, fortunately, he had a good advocate with his sister. So we
Yeah,
don't know how many other people are out there who don't have that advocate.
right.
We do work closely with the Area Agency on Aging and with their
Sure.
caseworkers to try to get referrals from them. Another interesting connection we have made over the last couple of years is with the Dayton Fire Department. So there's a lot of calls from to the fire department, to 911 for lift assists. So someone has fallen, somebody maybe fell out of their bed or fell out of their chair, and they can't physically get up. So they'll call 911. The medic comes out, the engine comes out, they'll pick them up, they'll put them back in their chair. But that's a resource that's really better utilized fighting fires or helping people from in an accident.
Sure.
So if we can go in and do preventative work for them, working with their paramedicine program, so we can prevent the falls in the first place, that will save a lot of funding throughout the whole community. It's going to save taxpayers money. It's going to save hospitalizations. It'll save their health. Hip fractures have a 25% mortality rate, so we need to stop the falls before they happen.
Absolutely, in all situations, that's really important, and it's a very clear example of a mismatch of resources, as you say, because while it's helpful to have those that will go out and safely get a person relocated in their very home, it's also not the best use of our our programs when when there's a call that is a life or death kind of call, or is going to impact a larger area. So I think more and more communities are getting wiser about that as our EMS folks have been speaking up more to let people know that there are people that just frequently have these problems and they live alone. So I think more and more as our population ages, we're seeing people more aware of these things and what some programs are that need to help them. Now, I don't want to leave this till the end because it's going to be one of the hottest topics probably for you all is how does one get on the list? What does one have to do? How does one qualify? I mean,
okay, that's a great question.
Funding sources for most are a patchwork quilt,
right?
But every patch in that quilt has got its own requirements or demands. So maybe you could address that a little bit for those viewing tonight who say, this sounds like a program that could really help my uncle or could really help Aunt Mary or something. So why don't you talk to those viewers for a few minutes, please?
Sure. So you have to be within Montgomery County and you have to own the home. It has to be in your name or the name of someone living with you. You have to be 60 or older to meet the requirements from our funding sources. I'd say the most of our funding sources limit 60 and older. You need to be current on your property taxes or on a payment plan. So there's no real immediate risk of foreclosure. And you have to be income qualified. So the average income for our programs is 80% of median or 200% of poverty. So in English, that's around $36,000 a year. But as I mentioned earlier, the average income is about 20,000. So we tend to see most folks very well under the income limitations that we have. But currently, within the city of Dayton, the only funding that we have is in the 6 ARPA neighborhoods. So the American Rescue Plan Act. So that is Carillon, Miami Chapel, Edgemont, Wolf Creek, Five Oaks, and Old North Dayton. So those 6 neighborhoods were selected by the city of Dayton for the funding that we received from the rescue plan funding. And that runs out at the end of the year. So we do not have any other city of Dayton designated funding. We do get around $100,000 from the Montgomery County Frail Elderly Fund through the Human Services Levy, and that's for modifications only. So speaking of patchwork, a lot of times we will piece together a project with 3 or 4 different funding sources because, for example, Frail Elderly will cover the grab bars or the tall toilet, but if the floor underneath the toilet needs replaced, that has to be a different funding source because that's a repair and not a modification. So, common sense doesn't always come into play in some of these choices, but we try to make it work. A tiny little amount of money from the Area Agency on Aging. Last year, COVID funding really made a huge impact for us. There was a healthy aging fund from the county. There was community development block grant funding for COVID from Montgomery County as well. So we are not seeing that this year. It'll be to the tune of probably $1.5 million less in funding this year than we had last year. So we choose our projects based on our funding. We don't
Yes.
set our projects and then say, oh, I hope we have the money to do this. So we will not start a project because our projects primarily are reimbursed from these grants. So we have to have the money in hand to do the repairs and modifications, and then we get reimbursed from our funding sources. So it's a tricky process.
Right. And I tend to think that for nonprofit organizations, that last piece that you described is sometimes the most difficult. You've got to have the money to get any money to
Yeah,
continue.
cash flow is really tricky sometimes. So,
Yeah.
the city or the county can be a month or two behind in reimbursements. So you have to have that money or you're gonna be up a creek. But we do work closely with all the other housing agencies. There's 8 of us in the community. So we are part of the Miami Valley Nonprofit Housing Collaborative. So Rebuilding Together Dayton, Habitat for Humanity, Miami Valley Community Action Partnership, County Corp, Greater Dayton Premier Management, Homeful, St. Mary Development, and Miami Valley Housing Opportunities. So the 8 of us meet quarterly. We discuss any burning issues that we have. We share a lot of resources with each other. We'll layer projects with Habitat or CAP or County Corp. They'll have funding. For example, Habitat received funding from ARPA for roofs and just for roofs. So they will do the roof on a house when we could go in and do the inside work. So we have an open line of communication with all those housing agencies. So there's no, limited duplication of effort. And we want to make sure we serve as many people as possible.
Yes, of course, with the relatively meager by comparison funding that you do have. Now, are you all your financial counselors with people who are taking applications and doing this? Are you all finding sometimes that you're the people who are saying, we might be able to afford this project and this might be what you want to do, but your health condition is such that this may not support you as much as you really need?
Well, that's a really good issue because that comes up frequently. We are not social workers. We do not
Right.
profess to be social workers. Um, we try to connect people with other agencies such as Senior Resource Connection, Area Agency on Aging. We really encourage folks to get a caseworker. We can go into a house. So back to like the requirements. So once people are all those qualifications are met and they fill out an application and we confirm all this information, we will send out our construction coordinator to do a 25-point assessment. So for example, somebody applied for repairs to their driveway and we are presuming that the insurance company said, hey, there's a trip hazard on your driveway. We're going to cancel your coverage unless you fix this. So our construction coordinator went out to take a look at it and they didn't have any heat. That wasn't what they were concerned about. They were worried about the trip hazard and getting their insurance canceled. So by doing that 25-point assessment, we addressed some other serious issues that may have been ignored. It's not our place to say you should or shouldn't stay in that house, but we do have to make the most of our resources and not, to use the expression, throw good money after bad. There are a lot of folks on the list and we help probably 1 out of every 3 who apply, and it's strictly based on funding. And I know you'll understand this as somebody who writes grants and requests funding from different sources. So many times I'm asked, how much funding do you need? And I say, how much funding do you have? And they'll say, well, what do you need? And I said, you could give me all of your money and I would still use it and need more. Yeah. So I've never turned down any funding. So it's just an interesting catch-22 that we are dealing with regularly, because I could use anything that I get, but I'll use whatever you can give me, but I'll promise you that more could be used. So it's really tricky.
Yeah. I'm sure it is. And as you say, everyone who runs an organization or a project on a shoestring kind of gets to understand that. Um, do you ever find that family members come forth when the contractors and others come around, that maybe the family members couldn't do it themselves, but under the guidance of others, they are suddenly empowered to help out, or their confidence is built, I should say, to be able to actually lend some volunteer labor to the project?
Well, that's funny because that's evolved over time when we have been, it's really when there's volunteers involved. I'm sure the skilled folks don't want somebody in their way to help, replace a water heater.
Right.
But for rebuilding day, we set an expectation with our clients that able bodied family members, if they are present, they will be expected to help. So nothing will turn away a volunteer faster than going to Mrs. Smith's home and watching her grandson watch TV on the sofa while they're painting and doing yard work and doing all this work. So
Right.
really, we will go in and say, here's your shirt. You can go out and do this project. Anybody can hold a paintbrush, anybody can pull weeds. And if you can't help or don't feel like helping, you can go somewhere else and come back the next day, because
Right.
it's really about keeping the volunteers engaged, helping the homeowner as much as we can, and making them having them walk away from that event with a good feeling in their heart, so that they'll come back. And
Sure.
so people will share that information. I think you're more likely to share a negative review like 9 times more than you are a positive review at a restaurant. So you want to have that good experience with your volunteers so they'll come back and help again next time.
Yes, and I do think it's important to recognize that volunteers have their own specific rewards for what they do. And we have to try to figure what those are for that particular volunteer. But there's a reason why somebody steps up and says they want to help. And it's that they are going to get something out of it too. It may not be anything that we would expect or that we would label, but they're and it may be motivated by faith or whatever, but there's still somewhere with volunteers there's a kernel of how it brings them a satisfaction, or they probably would not be participating.
Exactly. We see that with the forced volunteerism with the UD football team.
Ha!
So they've been working with us for about 12 years. Coach Chamberlain, one of our board members, he's our board chair now, played football for Coach Chamberlain. So we got the football team involved, and we get like 40 to 45 guys in the morning. Then they bring the second crew in at lunchtime. All the guys eat lunch together. The morning crew goes back to campus. The afternoon crew stays on. And so with those folks, we have them for the 4 years they're on the team, and what happens to them when they graduate. So, unfortunately, they don't all stay in Dayton, but there's an affiliate of a lot of different places across the country. So hopefully we've planted that seed so they'll go and seek out that a Rebuilding Together affiliate wherever that is that they might land. So it's planting that seed, and it's keeping that idea of volunteerism. And the guys love it. They really love getting out there and seeing how much they can get done. And we have them do a lot of demo work if we have a garage that needs to be torn down. So they're really a lot of strength on that team.
That's great. And you've mentioned, excuse me, the current neighborhood priorities for investment in your program, to give the tools and the means to carry that on. Did the neighborhoods themselves participate in that, or was that a top-down decision that we're going to go here and then there and then there? How does that get decided?
I believe, I can't speak for the city, but I believe that there were a lot of different factors that went into the selection of those 6 neighborhoods. And I know that they looked at tipping point neighborhoods. So they looked at neighborhoods that needed a little extra boost. They're all almost around the inner ring of the city. If you think about where they are, Miami Chapel, Edgemont, and Carillon are all adjacent to each other. Old North Dayton, is just right outside of downtown. So is Five Oaks and Wolf Creek. So those neighborhoods are that close to the core that I think that's helped the selection process. But several of those neighborhoods have very strong neighborhood associations, and so that definitely helps because they're a great referral source. They're a great coordinator of projects sometimes if we do something off rebuilding day. So that really helps to have a strong neighborhood association.
That's great. And with your point of view, from your vantage point, in looking at working through different neighborhoods and trying to make those kinds of improvements, um, I'm sure there are many factors that go into this. And you've already mentioned that age 60 is how, well, our federal government, really with Older Americans Act, starts defining that age as 60. But it, it it leads me to ask, with so many homes that your association has worked with over the time, how did we really get here with so much need for home repair when there's home ownership? I mean, it used to be in America that home ownership was the goal. Home ownership was the ticket to a better life. But then at a certain point in some of our neighborhoods, as you mentioned, the tipping scale happened. And so, in thinking about all the homes that you all have been in and all the neighborhoods, what are some of the factors that you think might be able to be evaluated earlier so other neighborhoods don't get there?
Well, I think the neighborhoods that we are working in are primarily older adults living there. I think their kids have left. They've either left Dayton or left Ohio.
Right.
So there's less resources. You see, if you look at Edgemont and Wolf Creek and Carillon, where are the stores? Where are the commercial spaces? Crime is an issue when you have abandoned houses. There's that goes into play a lot of times that people aren't safe, so they'll leave. So when we leave these neighborhoods, we're not leaving anything behind. And when we don't have a very robust code enforcement department, a lot of that stuff can slip, and then you're left with, where do I even start? The house is too far gone. So you get a lot of deferred maintenance. There are a lot of issues. It's really expensive to own a house. And back when you had two incomes perhaps, or you worked in the factory, and that was, you may have paid off your house, but your husband died and your husband took care of all of that. Now, I'm not being trying to be sexist, but we see that a lot. The majority of people we help are elderly women. So they're living in their home, they might own the home outright, their husband is gone, they're by themselves, and they don't know what to do. So they don't have the resources, they don't have the savings to replace the roof or repair the water heater or replace the furnace. So they're left with nowhere else to turn.
Okay, yeah. And I imagine you and your volunteers have a lot of good ideas on the prevention end and how this, can maybe be averted. How can it get to this level?
Yes, we do.
I bet. And I hope somebody's listening to you out there. In looking at information for the program, I also noticed how many tons your reports have about the number of tons removed from this project or that project or during this time period. And again, the question kind of arises, how did it get that way? How did it get there? That just tons of
Of
junk is,
trash.
yeah, yeah, trash and just junk is all over the place. And
Well,
I'm sure
Diane, that
neighbors have seen that grow over the time and it's frustrated them. So, you
that goes back to the code enforcement challenge, and that goes back to the vacant houses and vacant lots. We're not picking up trash from our client's yard. We're
Right.
picking up trash from the alleys. We're picking up trash from the vacant lots or the abandoned properties. So, they're stuck living next to that or adjacent to that because there's nobody else to clean it up. And it's the whole broken window theory where you see
Yes.
the trash, so we're just going to add more trash to it. And I, in my own neighborhood, I see trash and it builds upon itself, so it's not going to get any better until you can clean it up and get rid of the root cause, which is allowing people to drop off trash without any repercussion. So I
Right.
mean, that's a neighborhood issue, that's a keep a neighborhood watch um, idea, but it just builds on itself. And again, it's not the clients that we're working with, they're stuck living next to a vacant house or a property that's not well maintained, or a absentee landlord situation. So I know that the city is working on adjusting those procedures about going after absentee landlords in court. But it's been a long time. I've been doing this for 30 years, and
Yeah.
I lived in Dayton View Historic, and I had to go after an absentee landlord for housing code violations because the police weren't getting anywhere with the criminal activity taking place at his properties. So I testified in housing court with Judge Littlejohn and Judge Cannon, and I was out there with an actual camera taking pictures, and I was testifying. And eventually, he got enough code violations that he was sentenced to house arrest in one of his own properties for 60 days with an ankle bracelet. And come to find out, when he got out, he moved, he sold the property, so we got rid of him. It took several years, but it took that determination and that commitment to seeing through. And that's just one absentee landlord who owned 3 properties. So how
Yeah.
many absentee landlords do we have in the city of Dayton? We have a lot. And I live in front of one now who I deal with their trash every day. So it's an uphill battle, but we're not giving up.
Yeah. Well, I certainly know that you are not, but again, that question comes up to, prevention. It's a lot easier to stop something at times than it is to go in and have to use the kind of equipment it takes to clean it up. So,
Exactly.
yeah, exactly. All right. Then, so how many staff do you have now? When you started off being the first employee, and now your organization has grown. So, how many folks are you now?
Well, there's 4 of us who are full time and one part time client coordinator who fields 1,000 phone calls a month. We have just done a study on our phone system. And
Yeah.
then we have 2 AmeriCorps members through our national office. So we when we went year round, we still have rebuilding day, but when we went year round, we created a program called Seasonal Safe at Home. So each season has a different focus area. So the spring is rebuilding day, the summer is corporate rebuild events, fall is heat the town, where we address furnaces and water heaters, and the winter is safety kits. So we'll get folks to donate. If you donate $50, that will cover the cost of what a safety kit would include, which is like a fire blanket, a first aid kit, night lights, different things people can have, smoke detectors, CO detectors. So that's the seasonal safe at home program. And then the skilled trades program is run by our neighbor care director. So we have neighbor care, seasonal safe at home, and then the client coordinator or construction coordinator are the 4 full-time folks.
Okay. That's very good to know, and it's a wonderful thing that you've been able to expand to have the people to help implement the program that is going on. And I would also venture to say that rebuilding together Dayton based on back in Christmas in April and things like that, it seems like you all are fortunate to enjoy a fairly robust community positive opinion about the work that you do in helping people, and that's a real testament, I think, to success and having a large base of people like those volunteers and businesses that are supporting you and don't have to be convinced of the need. You know, is this family really hungry? Does this family really need a new water heater? I mean, it's like
Right.
people don't really have to be convinced of this. The need is more more apparent, I would say.
Well,
So
we're really fortunate to have a strong board of directors. We have representatives on the board from Messer Construction, Miller Valentine, Shook, and Danis. So all four will be having a friendly little competition on rebuilding day to see who can take on what kind of project and who can bring out the most folks from their company. And so we've really been blessed with a strong board of directors, and so that goes a long way for us.
that does make a very big difference. And we have another caller that's come in that maybe tuned into us after you kind of dealt a little bit with the football team, but asking if college students can volunteer for this. So I'll let you take that up, but you don't have to repeat what you've already shared
No,
about the
that's
football
okay.
team.
No, we it's a good point because we do have a new policy this year of working with those 18 and older on our National Rebuilding Day. So we are focusing on just houses this year versus houses and community projects because our day happens to coincide with Declare Ministries Living City project. So the volunteer groups who are bringing some junior high kids maybe and some churches who are not bringing folks who have necessarily housing skills, we are referring to declare.org where they can sign up for the Living City project that day. But we do work with college students throughout the year on projects. We can put them together with our seasonal safe at home program to build little book boxes. They're not little free libraries because we have to register that with them and pay them money for that name. So
I
we're building
see.
book boxes for our neighborhoods. We're focusing on 30 for 30 because it's our 30th anniversary. So we're going to do 30 book boxes. We're going to distribute 30 safety kits in the month of September. We're going to adopt 30 seniors in December. So we're trying to play on that 30 for 30 this year. We can't copyright it because sports ESPN already did. So we're just trying to carry through the theme of our 30th year by focusing on some 30 for 30 projects.
Oh, that's a nice theme. Yet another caller has brought in the question about your location and activity in Southern Dayton View.
We have done a lot of work in Southern Dayton View historically, but as I mentioned, that the funding for the city does not provide any funding for that particular area, unless they were in one of the 6 ARPA neighborhoods. So
Right.
we do have the other funding that's not limited to the city with the frail elderly funding and area agency on aging. So nothing specific for Dayton View, but we accept applications from folks throughout Montgomery County.
Okay, very good. Well, I fear that we're moving quickly to the close when we will have to say good evening for this particular program. But I wanted to make sure that all the viewers know that it will be replayed on DATV and on YouTube if there's a part of it you missed that you want to go back and look at. And I'm going to give Amy a chance now to talk about how do people make inquiries? So your contact information and best hours and all of that, whatever you'd like to add at this point, please.
Well, we're more than happy to have them reach out to us on our website. It's rtdayton.org. They can send an email to info@rtdayton.org. If they call us, all voicemails are transcribed to an email system. So 223-4893 is our phone number. So we're happy to answer any questions or make referrals to other agencies. We do work with a lot of other different agencies in the community. We are really happy to be working with Sinclair Community College with their occupational therapy department. We're part of their curriculum. So those students are required as part of their classes to go out and do assessments for folks to determine the best location for a grab bar or a handrail, identify any trip hazards. So, we do like to work with college students as often as possible. So we would love to get folks involved.
That's wonderful. So it sounds like there's something for everybody. It's something for every age or every skill or even a lack of a skill. You can, if they're willing to work and willing to be there, that they can assist with one of the projects that you all have going.
Right. They can
Good.
do a drive to
Yeah.
a safety kit. They can do a safety kit drive to garner supplies for that, or they can gather books for the little book boxes that we're doing. So yeah, there's a lot of opportunities.
A lot of opportunity still that all the places are not taken up. Okay, Amy, this is the time in the program where I ask you to give our viewers some comments that you'd hoped I was gonna ask, but I didn't get to. So it's
Well,
your
you are
time.
so good because you and I are Rotary friends, so we go back a ways, so we know each other pretty well. But you covered a lot of the bases. I just think it's important to understand that unfortunately we are unable to help everybody who comes to us, and it's not by choice. It's just by funding restrictions. I wish I had all the money in the world to do more work, but we do what we can with what we get, and we are more than happy to work with folks by referring them out to other agencies or doing what we can to help them with the resources that we have. So we are fortunate to be a part of a really great community that always seems to come through, and fostering the spirit of neighbors helping neighbors really can make a difference in our community.
Great. Thank you, and thank you to all of your volunteers and your board members and your staff and the folks that are all working behind the front to make sure all of these things get done. So much success in the future as our weather warms up, and hopefully a lot of us that need and want to do things can get out there and do it. So thank you, Amy. I appreciate your joining me tonight.
Thanks, Diane.
All right. Good night, everyone. Thank you.